Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Liz joining you, as usual, from Central Virginia, the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. And I am so glad that you're here with me for the first episode of 2026. Woo! Let's do this. So, couple things I want to mention to you before we jump into this episode for realsies. And first thing is this. I would love for you to consider joining me for a year of inspiring women. This is a virtual book club that I am hosting throughout the year, and it is devoted to reading and reflecting on female voices from around the world, with a particular emphasis on Indigenous voices, voices that we don't often hear from in our culture. And if you are a regular listener to this show, then you know I already feature a lot of authors on this show and will continue to do so, including one today. And I'm also really interested in learning from as many women as possible, and women who have not been fully ensconced in this dominant patriarchal paradigm that, those of us here in the US, we can't really escape. I think if we're going to find our way out of this shit show of a culture, we need all the inspiration we can get. So let's go get it. So that's the idea with the book club. Let's learn from women we might not hear from otherwise. We meet at the beginning of each month online on a Sunday afternoon, and I will share reflection and action guide for each one so that we can really integrate and apply what we're learning. And you can go to my website, hometoher.com, to learn more about the book club, see the first few titles. Although I will say one of the aspects of power that I think the feminine really guides us into is trusting in the power of emergence. So I'm allowing for that too by seeing what other books might rise to the forefront as the year progresses as we continue reading and exploring together. So if that piques your interest, please do go check that out. And the second thing I want to mention to you is I am continuing to offer one-on-one coaching and mentoring for women who are interested in truly understanding and integrating feminine power fully into their lives. And to that end, I have 3 spaces available this year for my full 6-month immersion into the 6 aspects of feminine power. And if you're not familiar with those, you can head over to my website and download a free ebook that describes those. I also outline them in the 2025 episode, The Future of Home to Her, and I'll link that in the show notes in this episode. But this coaching program is a deep and experiential dive into each of these 6 aspects of feminine power with the ultimate goal of helping you access them and integrate them fully so you can live your most authentic and powerful life. Goddess knows this is exactly what I want for women right now and what I think the world really, really needs from us. So if you're interested in learning more, you can book a discovery call with me on my website. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And now let's get on with it. All right. So my guest today has been my mentor, my dear friend, and a great inspiration to me for many years now. Probably more than anyone I know, she has really taken on this mantle of priestess and devotee of the sacred feminine and applied it to her daily life and her work towards social justice and advocating for those whose voices are marginalized. I've been wanting to have her on the show for years, and I am so thrilled she is here with me today. So let me introduce her to you now. Elana Auerbach is a lover, mother, mentor, activist, and priestess, and the author of the new book, The Sure Thing, A Pleasure Practice to Revive the Spark. Elana spent her childhood and young adulthood on what she calls the conveyor belt of life, being the good girl and doing what others expected of her. Raise your hand if that might apply to you as well. This looks like graduating Phi Beta Kappa from UCLA for her, working on Wall Street for a Japanese investment bank, and marrying someone with whom she felt no chemistry. It all fell apart in 2001 when Elana realized she'd been living a lie and found the courage to leave her marriage. In 2005, Elana founded Sensuelle, a woman's journey into sensuality, a program supporting women to fall in love with themselves. And a few years after becoming an ordained priestess with the sanctuary of the 13 Moon Mystery School, Elana was certified to teach their year-long immersion into the feminine mysteries, where she taught for over a decade and where I got to be one of her lucky students. She is joining us today from her home in Berkeley, California. Elana, it is such an honor to have you here. I'm so excited.
Pleasure to be here, and I need to honor the first peoples of this land. This is unceded Lishan Ohlone territory that I am speaking to you all from, and it is a delight, just a delight to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for naming that. And I'm getting emotional. I love you so much, and I'm so happy that you're here. It's funny. It's just like hitting my heart. Like this has truly been on my wish list for years now, and it's so perfect going into the 6th year of this show, and we're finally making it happen. So I love it.
Just bravo to you, girl, because you have mentored me over this past year in getting this book out into the world, because you trailblazed with your book, Home to Her, and this podcast. And so thank you. Just that mutual, giving and receiving. That is just the reality of how we live and how energy moves. And so I just want to thank you for your guidance and your genius over these past few months when I have been like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I called up Liz and she's just been brilliant. So thank you, dear.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. And I cannot wait to hear you talk about the book. Spoiler, I've already read it. It's amazing. I can't wait for others to read it too. But I would love to start with you, as I do with most of my guests, and having you share with people a little bit of your spiritual background and your background growing up. And the reason I ask that is twofold. I'm always curious. I know a little bit about yours, in this case, but I'd love to hear people talk about that. But I also find it's interesting sometimes when people find the through line of where they started and where they are now. Sometimes there's things they really have to abandon, and sometimes there's things that have guided them their whole life. So if that's okay, I'd love to start there.
Love to talk about this. I am a very, as you know, very, very spirituality is a very important part of my experience of being in a human body. I was born and raised in a Jewish family and had a brief moment. I did have a bat mitzvah, which is a rite of passage in the Jewish tradition when you're 12, usually as a girl, 13 as a boy. And when I was up on the bima in the synagogue, I remember, and the bima is like the stage, if you will, a moment when like this burst of light, I just was aware of a golden field. And other than that, I didn't really have any remembrances of feeling connected spiritually in a Jewish context until fast forward until my early 30s when I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area and I found a renewal Jewish congregation here. I had met a rabbi when I was living in New York who really inspired me, Rabbi Michael Lerner of blessed memory. And so it was a thrill to finally be in a Jewish congregation and feel like it was really meaningful. It was deeply, speaking to what was happening with me, looking inward. And so that was a congregation called Beit Tikkun. It still exists here in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, but they have online services. And Rabbi Kat Zavis is now the rabbi of that congregation. So really wonderful. And about that time, when in my early 30s, is when I discovered the 13 Moon Mystery School. And a few years earlier, in the late 90s, I was living in London. And I was very overwhelmed with what it was that I really wanted. I was married to my previous spouse and kind of living kind of semi-disassociated. And so there was a woman who would do colors. She was the one who brought the whole color, spring, summer, color to the UK in the 70s. And so I just wanted to streamline my shopping process because I would go into a store and be overwhelmed with I don't know what looks good on me. I don't know what I should go to. So I'll go to this person and know what colors at least look good on me. Well, I spent a day with her. And at the end of the day, she gave me an image and she did this with all of her clients, who she sees them as. And I didn't recognize myself in this image. And I remember getting into my car and looking in my eyes in the rearview mirror and going, okay, there's something that she sees that I don't see. Fast forward about 5 years, I'm now living in the San Francisco Bay Area. A friend of mine had received a letter on paper, printed out, double-sided, about a mystery school that this woman named Ariel Spilsbury was starting, that she had a vision since she was a young child. She was now in her 60s. And so I thought, okay, I don't know, something kind of feels right. I was drawn to it. And so I sat in the first couple of circles and it was like, okay, this is interesting, but I wasn't really, it was like, okay, maybe this is for me. I'm not really sure. The third archetype is the priestess. And I'm sitting there in the priestess frequency, and we have a day-long immersion into these different, archetypal frequencies. And I realized, my goodness, this woman in London gave me a picture of a priestess. It was because she was holding a chalice, which is one of the tools of the priestess. I empty so that I can fill. She had a dove at her third eye and all this other imagery of the priestess. That's when like the dominoes in consciousness started going, I'm a priestess. Well, no wonder I'm sitting in this circle right now. Meanwhile, I met my beloved lover man at around the same time, and he is a very devoted student of Zen. And so I had a prayer practice in the morning when I met him over 25 years ago, and he had a sitting practice, a Zazen practice. And so after about 6 months or so of us being together, I started Zazen, and then I went to a Zen retreat, and then I started studying with a Zen master, and as I had a Zen teacher for many, many years. And so I call my spiritual path, it's a trifold braided path of being a priestess of the goddess, a Hebrew priestess, and a student of Zen.
Oh, I love it. Yes, and for those of you who are interested, I will put this in the show notes too. Ariel Spilsbury, who founded the 13 Moon Mystery School, which I went through too. Ilana was my focalizer, which is who mentors and leads us through that process. She was on the show, gosh, early on. I want to say way back in 2020. So if you want to hear her talk about, just her own origin story in the 13 Moon Mystery School, I'll put that in the show notes so you can hear it too. Well, and I think you also kind of answered my second question too, which is great, which I always like to talk to people about how the feminine kind of showed up and came into their life. But if there's anything else you want to add there, I'm making the assumption that it was through 13 moons. But if there's anything else you want to put on there, I'd love to hear that.
I feel like that moment on the Bima that was the mother. That was the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is one of the many names, Hebrew names of the sacred feminine. And so I feel like that was my first moment. And I feel like, yes, I really opened to connect with her during the 13 moons. And it has been, just so profound, because the reality is, as you know, and as your listeners know, is that she's right here. We lean back and, you can just feel her arms around. I'll speak for myself. I can feel her arms around me. I love to kind of nestle my head into her ample bosom and just feel held by the mother. And whenever I intentionally turn towards her, she's always there. And I feel like it kind of brings me, I feel tears welling up, because she's so available, and she's really so available to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that too. And yeah, there's actually there's a meditation that I don't know if it's on my website, or I know I've made it available, and maybe I'll put it in the show notes, because it's on SoundCloud. That is related to that feeling of like being held by her, and I think it was very much inspired by you, now that I'm thinking about it, and you kind of guiding and helping me feel into that that sensation early on in the 13 Moon Mystery School. Yeah, because I have a very visceral sense of it too. Yeah.
And even right now, just hug yourself, put your arms around yourself, and just hold all those parts of ourselves, especially our little kids that need so
Yeah.
much tending. And then, and that may help some folks to really connect in with this part, which is,
Yeah.
yeah. But thank you. And
Yeah.
yes, I would love to get a link to that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about pleasure. I have so much I want to hear you say about this, but as you're kind of weaving your story, I would love to hear you weave in this aspect, and even like just giving a nod to the fact that I think a lot of people, if they think about spirituality, they're not necessarily thinking about pleasure, right? Like there's like a sense of there could be a sense of piety or purity or asceticism, and so I would just love to hear you talk a bit about your own journey towards that and the sacredness of it.
Mm, yeah, I'd be delighted. And first, to really respond to that separation that we've been, I believe, enculturated into, of the body is bad, pleasure is bad. And that comes from a Christian perspective, a particular Christian perspective, that comes from some Orthodox Jewish perspectives, and that comes from some Buddhist. So there are, and I'm not saying that those are the true interpretations of what these spiritual practices were truly meant to be, or ever really offered. However, that's how humans, particularly men, interpreted that the body is bad, that we are, we're born into sin, right? And that it's the afterlife. Like, we have to toil here and suffer so that we can make it to heaven. It's like, no, this is the garden. And there is, in the Jewish tradition, it is not all, the entire spectrum of Jewish tradition. However, it is a very body-based here, in rejoicing in being in these bodies. In fact, There's Shabbat, which is the holiest day of the year, a holiest day of the week for sure, and the most important holiday that many consider in the Jewish tradition, which is the Sabbath, sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, where we are meant to rejoice in being in these bodies, that it's about finding awe and wonder and play. And you get a double mitzvah. I learned this when I was in Hebrew high school. You get a double mitzvah, which is a good deed, if you have sex on Shabbat.
Oh my God.
Right? I mean, now
Wow.
that's super pleasure positive.
Yes.
Yes. So, and of course, the goddess traditions are all about, awakening through the senses as opposed to an abnegation of the senses, which is what we've been taught that many spiritual practices are. Oh, you're not supposed to, like you said, asceticism and all these other practices where we're supposed to deprive ourselves of what it is, the magic and the pleasure of being embodied in a human body in this lifetime. What a precious miracle that it is. So we are. If we weren't, why would Goddess have created the senses for us to delight in the beauty that is continuously evolving around us in the natural world? So clearly we are meant to awaken through the senses. So I left my former spouse and, it was no chemistry. The sex isn't so great. And just, and what a blessing it was to have that relationship and to find the courage to end that relationship, which both freed us both. Now he quickly married somebody else, has 2 children at least, and, is in a really wonderful place. And had a friend, this is back in the early 2000s, who was very involved in a sensuality, pleasure-focused community in San Francisco. And so I figured, what the heck, let's go. I mean, I'm going through a divorce. Let's start to explore this. And so I went to a one-day course, and then a few months later, I went to what they called the advanced pleasure course. And I showed up to this course and I was very resistant. I was like, I've already done this. I did, 1 day of exploring pleasure. That should be enough, right? I didn't want to go, but I'd prepaid. Luckily, I prepaid or I probably would have canceled. I show up early as I do. And it's in a second floor apartment in the inner Sunset neighborhood of San Francisco. And I'm there and I walk in and there's kind of chill music and pillows and flowers around. And I'm uncomfortable. So I was like, okay, I'll go get a cup of tea in the kitchen. So I walk into the kitchen and it was like what you read about in, or see in the movies or something in the romance novels of like, I caught eyes with this man who had this long brown curly hair and these piercing blue eyes. And I could have sworn I knew him from somewhere. And he lived not far from where I was living in San Francisco at the time, but we didn't know each other. We never had seen each other before, but I recognized him. And fast forward, it turns out we ended up being research partners that day. And I took him home with me that night. And so we started, the research partners was a term that this community used for 2 people who were wanting to research pleasure, research orgasm without any restraints, relationship restraints, let's say. So you could have several research partners. It was really however you wanted to practice, but it was giving permission to explore sensuality, explore orgasm, not requiring the confines of a traditional kind of monogamous relationship. And this was new for me, certainly. I was a serial monogamist, as was Bill. And so we started in an open relationship and it progressed. That was an interesting experience. About 6 weeks into meeting him, I, in reactivity from jealous rage and from projecting into the future, I broke up with him because I was like, no, I'm not getting my needs met. When about a month later, I was working with a really fabulous somatic therapist, Hakomi therapist. And she was like, yeah, so whatever happened with Bill? And I was like, I'm not really sure what happened with him. So I called him up after that session. He came right over. And what I realized is that when I was with him, he was attentive. We had so much chemistry. It was phenomenal. But as soon as I started projecting into the future, is this going to lead somewhere? Are we going to get married? I mean, I'm still going through a divorce, Liz, and it's like I'm just conditioned to as a female to worry about this instead of being in the present moment. So there's a great book called If the Buddha Dated, for anyone who's dating, which just is the Buddhist practices of returning to here and now, because that's all we have. And so we got back together and we ended up getting married we had an open relationship for another couple of years, which was a total wild ride. We got involved in some really interesting experiences together. And we got involved in, I'll just say it, in One Taste, before it was One Taste, actually, for about 7 months, which turns out to be a sex cult. However, one of our claims to fame is not many couples go into and come out of a sex cult still together. But we did that back in 2004. And then we got married. We had a child together. And so what was a super hot, very fulfilling sex life, we had the kid. You've got more, I mean, you're giggling already. Yes.
Yeah, I'm laughing. For listeners, you can't see my face, but I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah. So what was it was like it's like our cosmic coitus deflated like, a spent helium balloon. And for 12 years, there was a struggle of, I took on an etheric lover because I was like, okay, I was out snowshoeing in the Sierras when my boys were skiing. And so it was like, I was really turned on. So I was like, I'm just going to call Pan, see if he'll come, the half man, half goat, very well endowed. I will let you know. Anyway, so I had this kind of magical, mystical, etheric love affair with Pan that I shared with Bill. I wasn't going to cheat. I mean, a lot of people have their cheat on the side. I had done that with my first marriage, a brief affair. I wasn't going to go there again because that wasn't where I was going to go. I'd already been there. It's like, no, doesn't really work. So fast forward to 2018, I am it turns out going to a funeral with a Kohenet, a Hebrew priestess, who's a single mom at the time. And she wants to get her double mitzvah on Shabbat. She wants a Shabbat consort to explore sensuality. And I was like, bam, I want that too. I'd like that. And so it occurred to us, it was like, oh, it's a sure thing, a Shabbat unification ritual. So this is in like February 2018. And there's so much gunk between me and Bill and built up resentment. And it's like, difference in desire, which is totally normal. 80% of long-term couples report having, one person in the couple with higher desire than the other, and also the resentment of like getting rejected. And then it's like, okay, well, now you're in the mood. Well, no, I'm going to reject you, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it took me until December 2020 to invite him into this practice. And it was because one of our priestess sisters, we were going for a hike and she was telling me about some struggles with her spouse. And I said, well, in the afterglow of, after they had a very active sex life, in the afterglow of making love, you could bring this up with him. And then after a few steps, I was like, wait a second, I should take my own advice. I made a commitment to her by the winter solstice in, December, longest night of the year, 2020, that by then I would invite Bill into this practice. So it's that, the days are getting shorter. I'm like, oh goodness. I'm not even letting myself think about if he's going to say no. And our kid used to have a drum lesson on Saturdays. So it's perfect. Okay. I light the candle on my altar. I call him in. I anoint him with some oils. We make love. And afterwards I say, hey, baby, what do you think about deepening in intimacy, pleasure, and connection every week on Shabbat, if we can? He's like, sounds great, baby. And so that's what began a weekly practice. So it was no longer, are we in the mood? I'm in the mood. He's not in the mood. No, it's a practice, just like our meditation practice, just like a prayer practice, just like a yoga practice, any practice, just like a therapy practice. You might not feel like going to therapy, but you pick up, you go, because you're going to feel better after you do it. And it's the same thing. Never once in over 5 years of having this weekly practice have I thought, oh, that was a total waste of time. It's like, do you ever get off the yoga mat and think, yeah, that was just a waste? No, you don't. So the years, literally over a decade of muck and resentment and struggle and withhold and rage, it dissolved because because like going back to all that we have is here and now, right? That's all that exists ever, ever. It's just right here, right now. And so what I had now was a practice that I knew that every week we were going to explore. Now, a sure thing practice, our intention is to deepen in intimacy, pleasure, and connection. So you notice there's no like having sex, no orgasms required, none of that. Now, does that happen? Yeah, absolutely. It happens often. However, that's not the point. The point is for us to feel more connected with ourselves and with each other and enjoy pleasure, enjoy being in our bodies together. And so after about 6 months, we're practicing, we had our practice and I'm like, we high five afterwards because it's so simple and so profoundly changed my life, our relationship. It occurred to me, I turned to Bill and I said, honey, I think I'm going to have to write a book about this. Like, you're going to have to write a book. So here we are. I wrote the book because really I want to share the love. And not only do I want to share the love, I feel like this practice has sustained me and fueled me over these past 5 years to get involved in my local community like I never had before, ever in my entire life. I'm 57 years old. And I ended up running for local office, which was, that was a trip. That's another story. And we're organizing now for local candidates to flip the Berkeley City Council in November. So much extra energy I have because of this practice, because I no longer have that resentment and that it felt like a plug, like a clog of my Shakti, truly, because I wasn't taking care of myself and I was relying on to get that from my relationship. Now, Bill and I have a practice. And what I also realized over these years, because sometimes Bill's out of town or I'm out of town or somebody's not feeling well or something. And I could tell after a couple weeks, if we haven't had our sure thing, I start to get a little edgy, a little sharper tone. And then it occurred to me, well, wait a second. Why am I not having my own sure thing? And so, of course, there's the solo sure. You don't have to wait for anybody. You certainly don't have to wait for Prince Charming. Start your solo sure right now. And even if you're in a relationship and your partner may not be interested yet. So having that practice really continues to, I feel it's a self-love, self-nourishing practice, and it fuels and keeps the resiliency to continue to show up with kindness and courage in my family, in my life, in my community, and in the world.
Yeah, so rich. Oh my gosh, there's so much you said that's just kind of pinging for me. But one of the things that kind of popped up as you were talking was how we don't prioritize pleasure in our culture. I think there's why there's like Vegas comes to mind, where people are like, "Whoa, I've been too wound up, so let me go and do this thing and totally lose myself, and drink too much and gamble and do all the things that I wouldn't allow myself to do." And but otherwise, like day to day pleasure, it's just not a priority. And I don't know. I guess we could analyze how we got there, Puritan work ethic. I don't know, who cares, but, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, of course, like it's a skill. Like most of us don't need to practice being productive because it's so ingrained in us, it's just like a thing that you're supposed to be. But if you haven't had pleasure prioritized and you feel, and I think this is probably true, especially for women, you feel guilty for wanting that in your life, then having a regular practice for it makes sense, like for regardless, right? Like, I mean, regardless of where you are in your marriage or not, or anyway, like it's funny, isn't it? That like something that feels so good would need to have structure around it in order to make it happen. But I think that's true for most of us.
Yeah, well, and it's because of what you talk about all the time. And I call it the puritanical patriarchy, which you said, because we've all been conditioned into work first and pleasure is
Yeah.
really unnecessary.
Yeah.
And so feeling And feeling good and cultivating pleasure is a revolutionary act in this culture. It
Yeah.
really is. We are saying, no, I matter. My pleasure matters. Being alive and feeling good in my body is going to make me, first of all, be able to discern what's right for me and what's not right for me. It's going to have me be able to hear something and know, no, that sounds a little off. So we don't get gaslit and misled, because there's a lot of forces out there who are clearly trying to convince us of what reality is and what's really happening, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, it is an act of revolution. It's pleasure activism. Adrienne Marie Brown coined that term. And, in an oppressive society, which we live in, and you and I know we have a lot of privilege in this society, and yet we are oppressed as females, but our light skin gives us privilege. And we know that. We've done a lot of work around that, you and I, to support people in recognizing that in themselves. And yet it's an oppressive society. So any act of pleasure is rejecting that paradigm that has been put upon us and helps us groove the pattern of the reality that we are co-creating. And you are with your book, and this podcast is one that's about connection and love and partnership and collaboration and creating the garden here, because this is what we have, is a garden with
Yeah.
plenty for everyone.
Yes. I also want to say this just because I'm silly proud of myself for coming up with this. I think I've said it on the show before. So if y'all have heard me say this, just you can roll your eyes at me and move on. But when I think about like sort of the sacredness of the body and pleasure, if like you think about it, doesn't always happen this way, but human life has the potential to begin with this like dual explosion of good feeling. Like talk about the big freaking bang. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and isn't it funny that that is the metaphor? Like, that's what we talk about, how the universe came into existence through a big bang, when like, this is like how human life can start too, for an alignment, it's all going good. It starts from this place of pleasure. So like, how could this not be like the most sacred thing? It's sort of wild to me that asceticism and living in a cave and removing oneself is kind of, in some traditions, considered sort of the pinnacle of spiritual success, when reality mirrors something so much more beautiful and sensual and relational to us,
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
and I think, and it may, even be part of our human supremacist perspective that we're also indoctrinated into. Like, we are not animals. We are not part of the natural world, this disassociation. Instead of, yes, we are. We are
Yeah.
part of all of this. Of course we are. We are of the worth. And I love, often many spiritual traditions are about starting in the base and then moving up. Like that's,
Yes.
however, we can flip it and start at the crown, bringing in, the energy from the crown and then going down. And really the deepest, most embodied expression of spirituality is when we come down and connect at the root all the way, like fully alive and activated down into the earth. Because we are earthlings. We are of the earth. Instead of, I feel like that other reverse is that looking towards the next life. In Hebrew, it's called olam haba, or after we die, you'll go to heaven. It's like, no, right now, right here,
Yeah. Yeah.
embodied, fully
Yeah.
open-hearted. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have so many questions. Okay, where do I want to go next? I I want to know what you think might be all people, right? But like I am particularly interested in for women since that's how I identify. But like, what are possible barriers that you think that women or anyone might encounter to like committing to something like this? And have you heard from women that you've shared this practice with, like where they might stumble in sort of fully committing?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. I think as women, number one, shame has been imposed upon us.
Yeah.
And shame is really the age-old tactic that the patriarchy does of pitting people against each other. For instance, working class whites against working class people of color. You keep the masses fighting with each other. You keep women fighting with each other. So then they don't collectively bring their power in community to turn against what's actually repressing them, right?
Right.
The ruling elites or the patriarchy or whatever that is. So it's the same idea, except shame is used as a weapon for us to turn against ourselves. So someone's belief or some societal belief of that we shouldn't be touching ourselves, or our butt shouldn't look like this, or we shouldn't have these extra beautiful folds of skin in our body, or the wrinkles or the neck, or whatever it is, that we shouldn't have that, and someone else's belief that then we weaponize against ourselves. So it's like this paradigm of, okay, great, we can keep them down by continuing to shame them, and then we spend billions of dollars on trying to beautify ourselves, trying to make us look like some ironically airbrushed version of what the female is supposed to look like, right, in this culture.
Yeah.
Instead of, can you imagine when we unleash all of that time and energy on loving ourselves exactly as we are, cultivating our pleasure bodies, our passion, our desires, which inevitably pleasure, and I'm holding my belly right now, that's where it lives in our bellies. And what else? That's where the passion is. That's where creativity is. So as soon as we start to crank open that flood of energy that comes up,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, we have all these creative ideas. We have all this passion, all of this desire, what I want to bring into the world, how I want to help my community, how I want to make things better, more beautiful, more fun, more playful, more joyous. And so it's recognizing any kind of disempowering thoughts, especially ones that are recurring, and noticing, oh, am I getting caught in the shackles of shame?
Yeah.
And in the book, there is an exercise. The book I call it a playbook because it's very interactive. There's a lot of exercises. There's journal pages. And there's freeing ourselves from the shackles of shame, exercise that I do regularly. It's profound so that we don't need those remnants of that imprisonment that's not real.
Yeah.
We don't need to buy in to this culture of oppression and repression. And that's what's going to free us all. And that is, I remember years ago, the Dalai Lama said it's Western women who will who will save us. Something like that, I'm paraphrasing. And so I believe that part of that is us Western women recognizing the power of the pussy, the power of the pleasure, the power of our passion. And by intentionally turning towards that and cultivating a regular practice. And so there may be obstacles. So shame being one of them. Another big obstacle is I don't really know what I want. I don't know. And so this is very common. You're not alone. We have also been indoctrinated to this is what you should want. This is what you should want. This is what you should look like. This is what you should want. These are the next steps, that conveyor belt of life, right? So of course we don't know. We haven't built our muscle of I know what I want. And so how do you do that? You just put attention on asking yourself that. And there's a whole chapter in the book about cultivating your I know what I want muscle. Because if we don't know what we want, then we don't know what we don't want. And we're much more empowered when we know what we want. And so I started this practice 20 years ago. Most often when I first started, the answer was, I don't know. I don't know. It's okay. It's okay to not know. Just stay with the not knowing. And I know it can be uncomfortable and disorienting not to know, but just breathe through it, hold yourself through it. And you will find, and I would ask myself the most mundane things. What do I want for breakfast? What do I want to wear today? Do I want to brush my teeth first or wash my face first? And so those little mundane things, we start to build that muscle. So then when we are in, a heightened experience of, let's say, in the bedroom with a partner, then we've cultivated that muscle that we can tune in to be like, even though something's going on over there with him, but you know what? I'm feeling like, no, I'm kind of done with this. So then we say, have a boundary.
Yeah.
Actually, no, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd rather have this, or I'd like to take a break right now, or whatever, so we don't overstep boundaries that we don't know are there until we've overstepped them, which is okay to do also. But it's all in a process of really turning inward and building these awareness muscles that it's not our fault that we don't have them. No matter if you're, 13 or 25 or 85, it's okay. You can start wherever you are, and you will be amazed at how you will begin to know what you want as you continue to ask yourself that question.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you said it's funny, even before you mentioned boundaries, that was coming up for me. And a question of like how often are our boundaries crossed because we don't actually know that we have a boundary. Like we haven't given ourselves, and not because we don't care. I'm not like trying to put that back on us, but more because we didn't know that we could set one. We didn't know that we could pause and say, I'm not sure what I want in this situation, and I'm going to give myself time to figure that out. And I have a question related to that, but before I ask it, I just wanted to say too that I'm so glad that you named you like kind of having a practice around like facing shame. Because I think, it goes back to what I said earlier about needing to practice pleasure. Like I imagine us carrying not just our own shit, but like our mothers, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers. And I think, for us as women living where we are with a level of education and a relative safety. Oh, I'm not minimizing any of the shit that's going on right now, but also we're at a particular moment in time where a lot of us have more of that than women have for generations before us. And so it would make sense to me that there's all this baggage still that we're carrying sometimes completely unconsciously. And so it wouldn't be just like, well, I've read a book and now I put it down, or I've decided I'm not going to feel this way anymore and I don't feel this way. Like, no, it is work and it is practice, and it's such valuable work, not just for ourselves, but I think for people around us and descendants and communities and whatnot. But it is something that we have to work at. So I'm so glad that you named that. And I guess there's the other thing that's sort of coming up as we're talking about knowing what you want is I'm imagining, and I just would love to hear you react to this, like, what if this gets kind of messy for your partner? Do you know what I mean? Like if you've just sort of been, because I can see opening up this beautiful intimacy through a practice like this and also really disrupting things a little bit and like shaking things up. Because if you are like, oh, wait a minute, I've been participating in this in a particular way and I've checked in and that doesn't feel right anymore. And so I'm just curious, like how you would respond to that and like what, how that lands for you.
Yeah, I think, yes, things are going to get stirred up. It's not going to be the same as whenever we do anything, right? We add anything into a relationship, especially something like this. So there's a lot of guidance in the book about how to have conversations, maintaining curiosity. So if something's going on with your partner and they really liked it the way it was, I propose that they liked it, but they have no idea how good it can be.
Yes.
That's the thing. They have gotten, because they've also been conditioned. Okay, I'm told that I'm supposed to have sex with my wife twice a week and, we're doing that and she's cooperating and I feel good. That feels good. But what is true is that the realm of pleasure and sensuality is infinite. It is literally infinite. And that's where, and the connection and the overlap into spirituality is profound, is real. And so the more that we open, the more our hearts open into pleasure, like I'm feeling it right now, like pleasure rolling through my body. Trust that your partner will open to something too. And so you may have to say, yeah, baby, it's not going to be the same as it was because I want something better. And
Yeah.
it's been good. It's
Yeah.
been good, but let's go for something like, wow, let's have an intention. What do we want? What do we want for this year for our sensual, sexual fulfillment? What is that for us? And so that's the first thing, is to set an intention for your sure thing practice. And so whatever inspires you, if it's deepening in intimacy, pleasure, and connection, that's great. Use that one. or whatever it is that really, when you hear it with an intention, as you know, it's got to light you up. It's got to turn you on when you hear it. And when I say deepen in intimacy, pleasure, and connection, I'm like, yeah, I want that. I still want that after 5 years.
Yeah.
And so you want to find something with your partner that you both are like, heck yeah, we want that. And then you create a practice that fulfills that intention together.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that what else is possible too. And in my own limited experience, I think, and speaking in very hetero relationships here, but like 'cause that's, what I primarily know, but um I think that men have been indoctrinated to be kind of transactional, because that proves that they've achieved success. If they uh, bring a woman to a specific type of orgasm within a specific type of amount of time, then they've done their job and they feel good about that. And they want to do their job and they want to do good. And so there's also, this question of like, what else is possible? Like, what else is possible? Like, yeah, there's that, but what if there's like all of this other that's possible too? And there's multiple ways to give and receive pleasure. And how good does that feel, when you're just like a smorgasbord instead of like I got to check this box. Okay, good. I'm okay. Yeah.
Exactly. And it may be a little intimidating because it's terrain where you may not have traversed before or as a couple. And so be okay with that and kind of be explorers. You're like sensual explorers and take on that. And what can we discover? What can be new? How can I feel without having an attachment to it, but just as like you're in an experiment? I call my website is the Sure Thing Experiment, because it's like we're experimenting. We're in this love laboratory of experimenting with intimacy, pleasure, and connection. And so what feels good? Oh, that doesn't feel so good. Okay, so then ask for something else. Well, let's try this. Well, let's try this. And together, and I know some people might be like, oh, this just feels like another thing to do on my to-do list. And so what I can tell you is this practice. I mean, it's been such a miracle that I wrote this book and continues to feed me. And the energy that you will be generating and the overflow from having sensual fulfillment in your body and in your partnership, if you're in a partnership or polycule or something. I know a lot of folks are now multiple, as long as it's consenting adults. Sure Thing is with, from one to as
Mhm.
many people as you want.
Yeah.
It's about having a regular practice, fulfilling that intention that you set.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing it back to that because I feel like I've referenced work a couple times, and, like, I just wanna be clear too, I don't this sounds like the best kind of work. It's just like it's more like if you're one of those people that's been really indoctrinated in a puritanical work ethic like I was, to me, it's actually kinda helpful to be like, "I have got to set this as a priority. I have got to work at pleasure," because then that means I'm gonna do it. Yeah. Okay, we're almost
Sure,
out of
get
time.
it in your calendar. I mean, that's the thing. Get it in your
Yeah.
calendar, and then when the time comes, it's like, it's not, "Am I in the mood?" It's not, and sometimes, and I have like, what are the 3 things? It's commitment, effort, and, devotion
Yes.
are the 3 foundations for any
Love
practice.
that. Yeah.
Yes. And so, yeah, sometimes it's like a little bit of effort for me to get off the couch. And I know here's the simple way to start any Sure Thing, whether it's with myself or with my beloved, is one of us answers the question, what would be most pleasurable right now? That's it. What would be most pleasurable? And so imagination is the only limitation to answer that question. Perhaps it's a bath. Perhaps it's taking a delicious bite of food. Perhaps it's a massage. Perhaps it's anointing. Perhaps it's a dance. Perhaps whatever will be most pleasurable right now. And then you can use that simple question throughout your Sure Thing. Maybe ask your partner now, what would be most pleasurable right now for you? And what that question does is it helps us to bring us here and now, bring us into this present moment and discern, what do I want? What feels like fun? What feels like it would be really pleasurable? And then give that to ourselves or to a beloved.
I love that. So we're almost out of time, and I know, but we've touched on this already, so I think it's okay. But I am really wanting to close because I think it's super important to come back to this. Like we're recording this, right in the middle of all of these ice showdowns in Minneapolis, and it's so deeply troubling and horrifying to even watch what's going on in the country. And so I can totally understand that impulse and that feeling of like contraction and like, how can I even be fucking thinking about this right now? And, you already referenced Adrienne Marie Brown. I think she does such powerful work around this and, pleasure being the fuel for the activism that keeps us going. But I also feel like you hold this lens so well. So I just want to give you last chance here to really talk about how you see the intersection of those things and how this practice fuels that kind of work.
Absolutely. And thank you so
Yeah.
much for that question. Absolutely. Our nervous systems are very activated right now. Clearly, what's happening in our country. And when you look at a bigger picture, of course, what the US has been funding around the world, most recently in Gaza and Palestine, of course, that's going to come home to roost. That's what we see. We see, that happening here. But that doesn't make our nervous systems feel any better just because we can understand, okay, this makes sense that this authoritarianism and this brutality and cruelty and hard-heartedness is now on the streets of our country. So we need to tend to our nervous systems. And by coming back, by just even right now, putting your hand on your heart, or maybe one on the heart, one on the belly, whatever feels best for you, and taking some deep breaths. And whenever we exhale longer than we inhale, bring our nervous system calms down. So having a practice, a 4-1-5 breath, inhale for the count of 4, hold for 1, exhale for 5, very simple. So we've got to regulate our nervous system, and having regular practices will do that. Having just like a 4-1-5 breath, having a regular pleasure practice does that because it starts to integrate in your body that, okay, wait a second, I need to be here, embodied. How do I feel? How do I respond to this? So we're not reacting. How do we respond? How do we respond with kindness and with courage? Beyond our comfort zone, because we're beyond our comfort zone now. And so this practice, I believe, is exactly the medicine that we need to find our most courageous selves and inspire our community, because we can't do this alone. We have to be in community and we have to be in solidarity with each other. And so this practice is, I believe, one of the foundational practices that we can use to carry us through this very challenging time that is calling us beyond anything that we have ever been called to in my lifetime,
Yeah.
in this country, to
Yeah.
stand up. And there are many behind us who have done this through the civil rights, through the suffragists, and so we can call them and inspire us. And we need practices, personal practices. And I believe that the Sure Thing is one of those practices. And that's why I'm so grateful that it's coming out right now, so that this can be one of the tools that people can use to sustain ourselves, to continue to be resilient in these dangerous, beautiful times.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for that. And I also just want to tack on real quick there that when I talk about feminine power and the different aspects of feminine power, one of the ones that is so clear to me in the historical mythological record, and also what I've learned experientially from you specifically, is the power of celebrating and sustaining life, and joy and pleasure is 100% part of that. So it's a way of accessing power that has perhaps been offline and putting it in service for good. So everybody wins. Everybody wins. So with that, Ilana's book is going to be, I'm pretty sure by the time that go on Amazon and look, it's either going to be on pre-order or it's going to be out by the time this comes out, which is, I am aiming for around the full moon of February. So go check it out.
SureThingExperiment.com, Sure Thing Experiment. Join the experiment. How many Sure Thing practitioners will it take to tip our society from one based on domination to one based on collaboration?
Love it.
We won't know unless we try. So come join the experiment.
I love it. And I will put that in the show notes for sure. And yeah, here's to our, collective evolution and joy. Right alongside our rage and our outrage and all of it. Thank you so much, Elana, for being here. I love you so much. I love your work in the world. It's such a joy to be in conversation with you formally. Wishing you so much success with your book. And thanks to all of you guys for listening. It's always a joy to share these conversations with you. If you like the show, you can subscribe, you can leave it a favorable review, you can tell somebody about it or lots of people. You can do all those things if you are so inspired to do so. And until next time, take such good care of yourselves. Go get yourself some pleasure, and I will be with you again soon.